you are not obligated to pick a team.
Oh, interesting.
Like, you can just be
Interesting.
you for a
Yeah.
while. Maybe you never pick a team. Maybe you like are like take your time to figure it out. Like, these are the biggest questions that there are, right? And it feels
Interesting.
so scary to not have a team.
Yeah. Yeah, to not
That
belong to anyone, like any group.
that's the hardest feeling, is to feel like you are alone.
100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening. All right. Well, Derek, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Sydney?
I'm doing great. I'm stoked to talk to you. I know we've been communicating for a couple of weeks, so it's always interesting to put like a face to the name of the person I've been emailing with back and forth.
Hmm.
But enough about me. I'm stoked to have you here. I would love to hear just kind of a little bit about who you are as a person and where you're coming from and what your story is.
Yeah, so um, you know, I I guess I can start kind of at the beginning. Um, I uh, I feel like a lot of atheists, when they talk about their lives, uh, if they're former Christians, they want to like really like build up their bona fides and like convince people that they were really Christians or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I don't feel the need to do that. I think it'll
Good.
become pretty
Good.
apparent.
Yeah.
Um, I think that kind of like it kind of seeds part of the argument that like you can't have a like a honest atheist position now unless you were really a Christian, right? But that kind of that that just feeds into the people that don't. I mean, they don't have a right to say what we believe anymore, so
Right.
why bother? But
Right.
I mean, it's just the fact that, my parents were Christian. I grew up in a uh I mean, and it's fundamental, like it's central to know a lot of what we're going to talk about today, to say like I was in, a very small Christian school, um and it was part of a Baptist church, and so it was a pretty insular kind of life, not totally secluded from real life. That's definitely not the case, but you know, pretty protected. Like my parents would let us watch like Veggie Tales and
Yeah.
Disney movies, but they
Yep.
did have some uh, they did draw the lines at certain things. Like we had probably almost 100 Disney movies, but we had to return
Wow.
Pocahontas, for instance. And uh, and when I asked my parents the first time, they said it was because it was too violent. But then I think I heard from my brother that the real story was, it's about paganism. Like years later, about
Oh,
colors of the wind and like animism and stuff like
interesting.
that. That I think that's the real story.
Yeah.
Um,
I would have thought maybe it was like all the spirits, how like the spirits of the ancestors talk and stuff like
yeah.
that.
Um, and so watched like a ton of Veggie Tales and stuff like that. And it was definitely a big part of our beliefs of like, you know, uh, Christians being warned to guard their heart and to um, be careful about the input from the outside world, um, that kind of thing. And uh, you know, at the school, I was taught young Earth creationism in science class, um, uh, at various points, and then I went on um, to get really interested in science and um, math. I was very good at math, and so had a pretty good academic career in high school and through college, and um, so I've been working as an engineer for 10 years. And the kind of odd thing, I mean, I guess it happens to some people, but um, I I was very, very involved in my church in high school and college. I was, um, you know, that was what I was doing with my free time. Um, not entirely exclusively, but I mean, going to church all the time, involved in campus ministries all the time, youth groups, um, and that was all the way through college. And um, so that's kind of where that's kind of the like religious background that I had
Yeah.
overall.
Do you remember how old you were, like the moment that the young earth creationist stuff didn't really line up in your mind? Because you talk about how you're such a big fan of science, and I feel like at some point there would have been a moment where you were like, wait a second, what's going on here?
Yeah, so the thing is that um, what I realize is really important to understand about young Earth creationism is like the really extreme lengths um, that proponents go to um, to build up walls uh, between that belief and the obvious science that contradicts it, right?
Right.
So, like, we could talk all day about how it doesn't make any sense. There's this and that science that doesn't fit. But like, um, like a really clear example of what I'm talking about is, um, you know, I have started to try to go back into my past and like start to get some of the details about some of the things that I vaguely remember. Because when you're a kid and your favorite
Right.
teacher starts talking about science and creationism, and it seems like, he's teaching you these wonderful things, and then you go on to get really great grades in science, like, you don't like, you don't like go back and think like, wait, that science camp where we talked about a bunch of church stuff, like, who was that? Like, what was that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and one of the threads that I found was there was a book that was on my fifth and sixth grade teacher's desk. Our school is so small that each teacher taught 2 full grades,
Wow.
all of the subjects. And
Wow.
on my science teacher's, on my teacher's desk, he did all the subjects, um, was this book that he taught from in science all the time. And I remember the cover as clear as day because I saw it all the time. And it was this picture of a sledgehammer going through a pane of glass. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was about science. And
Right.
by through that class, he was talking about creationism, evolutionism so much that I finally went back and I found out what it was. And it's a book written by um, Ken Ham and another guy who, if you don't know who Ken Ham is, um, you're very lucky. Um, uh, if you do, then you're probably just rolling your eyes really, really hard
Yep.
right now. But
Yep. Yeah.
um, uh, and what it was it was a book written, and so follow me here. It was written
Okay.
in response
Okay.
to the National Academy of Science, I believe, who were writing. It was a specific paper that the National Academy of Science wrote in response to all of the creationist shenanigans going on in the education system. Um,
So it was his response to a response that they wrote in response to other like evangelical creationists.
yeah, if you keep going back and forth, it's, yes, it's a response to a response to creationism. So,
And
you
was he
know,
like teaching from that book, or was he like just reading it because like he was just reading it?
so it's basically so the what the National Academy of Sciences did was they sent out this small, I guess like a booklet or like I mean, I found it as a PDF, but it probably wasn't a PDF in 1999. Um, but it was just like a short uh, paper talking about evolution,
Mhm.
about why it was important, about ways to explain it, and examples of these challenges that were coming up in classrooms to teachers, because it's a phenomenon in this country that uh, when teachers bring it up in school, that um, that they will get pushback from parents, and they'll say, "Oh, well, this is something um, that is against my beliefs," and there's, uh, and then they'll start saying things like, "Oh, well, there's this controversy about evolution and so forth," and so it will cause these real problems for teachers. And the thing is, if you're a teacher, you have a bunch of kids you're trying to corral, you're trying to teach them so much stuff. Like, the, like being able to pick a fight on this and make a stand on this,
Yeah.
it's like you can't do it. Like, you have so much
Right?
stuff to do.
You've got,
Um,
like, enough on your plate.
yeah, and so the National Academy of Sciences was trying to like um, get um, uh, trying to give them resources, and and we can talk a little bit more about that because the story gets a lot worse. But
Oh,
to
no.
finish what I was talking about, um, so what this book that my teacher had was, it was a counter to that, because the National Academy of Sciences is trying to equip teachers. And so now the creationists are trying to equip their people with specific arguments to supposedly debunk those things.
Wow.
So,
So one side is trying to help teachers, and the other side is trying to help teachers argue against that help, trying to, like,
yes,
get interesting.
yes.
Wow.
Trying, and that's the really devious thing is, like, it's specific ways to try to have it both ways, to try to have science, but then when someone presents specific evidence, specific studies, tests, concepts, um, they come up with these ways to twist the truth, to outright lie, to obfuscate things so
Right.
much that when someone is, who has been smartly trained in evolution, in science, tries to explain it, the person they're talking to already has counters ready,
Right.
already has a response saying, "Hey, I've heard that before, and I was told that doesn't make sense. And even if I can't totally understand or remember why it doesn't make sense, I've been told it doesn't make sense. So you're wrong. You are
Yeah.
an evolutionist. You're trying to trick me. You're trying to separate me from my religion, whatever." Um,
Yeah, and it's more about, I feel like with people like that, the ones who are focused so much on negating arguments like that, it almost has nothing to do with the information and everything to do with just learning debate tactics. Like, they
mm,
just wanna make sure they know these debate tactics to kind of, like, gotcha, as opposed to actually researching whether or not they're correct about the information that they're debating.
Yeah, it's about tripping up the person trying to explain things,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
to um, being able to instill doubt, or just um, be able to have that permission. Like, they say they have evidence, but I've been given a way to believe it, and they haven't completely disproven it in a way right in front of me. So therefore, I can keep believing it. I've already been taught um, I've already been taught this. And actually, at one point, um, one of the things I wanted to research was, at one point my parents did put me as um, I was homeschooled for 1 year, and part of that was, it was essentially a Christian debate camp type thing.
Interesting. I
Yeah,
didn't even know that exists.
yeah, and I haven't been able to look up the details on it, but my suspicion is it's probably some kind of feeder program for like the Heritage Foundation and like all these uh,
Probably
uh,
so.
uh, religious uh, law groups and stuff,
Yeah, probably so.
political activism type stuff. Um, and I mean, that's devious too. Like, I read books on rhetoric and, you know, logical fallacies, and I went to this debate camp and I heard these incredibly brilliant um, students. They were a little bit older than me, talk so eloquently about their faith and about, um, I mean, I remember one of the examples was they did a little mock debate on um, design and creation. So like the evidence that the world is designed, right? And like being surrounded by that and like having these adults teach you things, having these older students teach you things,
Yeah.
and you learn about logical fallacies, and you're like, oh, I have all these tools now to figure out truth, and yeah, that's great, but they were still trying to hold on to things like um, the Bible is the inerrant word of God, and they had like a very specific meaning of that, that it's literal, that
Yeah.
um, that um, that it's a source of truth, that it itself is a source of truth, and
Yep.
therefore your world, like your worldview, they'll use this term, worldview
Yeah.
um, has to abide by, has to maintain that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's like real, like it sounds like putting it together, it almost sounds insane that, those two things, like all of that debate, science, all this training could still hold on to something that's, um, so untenable. But,
Right.
it's, if the group accepts it, that's what you're taught, then it really seems solid. It really does.
Yeah, and the difference there is wild. If you are a science-based person, you say, this is what the evidence shows. The evidence might change. Science and research has changed. It changes all the time. So even though this is what we know to be true, it wouldn't necessarily be surprising if in the future we find out more. Stay tuned. But if you're like a creationist leaning or somebody whose entire agenda is making sure that the Bible stays prevalent, you say, this is the correct word. It's on you to make sure it stays correct. It's on you to make sure that everybody keeps believing it. Instead of it needs to prove itself correct, it becomes the onus of the people who are supposedly the followers to basically be the ones who keep it in business. And
Right.
it's this weird stress that
Mm.
doesn't come with facts and evidence and
Yeah.
research.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, that's like a really, really clear way to put it, that, that kind of underscores a lot of what I was taught, that, we were taught, okay, this is the truth, and we need you. God wants you to argue that, the Bible's the truth, and, even argue against other Christians. That was like a total theme um, in my, religious training, that, um, there are Christians who follow the Bible,
Mhm.
and there's a bunch of like possibly not real Christians at all, who claim to be Christians, but because
Yep.
they don't follow the Bible, they're not real Christians,
Right.
or they're like misguided, or technically going to heaven, but not really on our side. Like, um, and, but yeah, that really is a way of putting it, is like, when it's that drilled into you, like, oh, this is important. Like, this is something that there's lots of challenges against. There's people who are going to try to convince you otherwise, but you know, we're we're evangelicals. We need to convince other people that,
Yeah.
like, we need to do that. You need to be able to do that. You need to
It is
have those skills.
your
You need to
job.
build it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
we're going to tell you what you have to believe, but it's the onus is on you to make sure you believe it and everybody else believes it. And it's like, whoa, I'm still learning here, right? Like, I'm still trying to figure out what the truth is. That's
Uh,
wild. And so, how old were you when you kind of decided to think maybe none of it was what you believed, as opposed to like, oh, there's some weird, because I feel like people who grow up Christian, and I loved what you brought up about how a lot of people think in the atheist discussion that they have to be like mega Christian, like super Christian, or like the trauma wasn't bad enough, or the change wasn't bad enough, or powerful enough. I feel like there is always that period where we're young and we're like, that doesn't really make sense, but I'm not going to question it, because so much of Christianity is the fact that I'm pretty much an idiot and I need to like just listen and like keep studying and keep asking and keep praying. Like the idea that I'm confused doesn't surprise me, because I've been told that I was born into sin and that I'm going to spend the
mhm,
rest of my life getting out of it. So it doesn't surprise me that I don't know everything. But then we go through that point where we're like, no, literally, it's not making sense at all. But I don't want to say anything because it's clearly making sense to everybody around me, which I think if we actually knew the truth, we would realize that everyone in the room thinks they're the only one who's slipping. They're like, no, no, like I get it. It's great. I understand. Um, but what point was that for you? Was that like teenage, 20s, earlier than that? Like, what did that look like for you?
I mean, getting to the point where like I could face the conclusion that none of it was real.
Hmm.
Um, it it took a long time. So, um, you know, I I took a path where after college, through college I was still very religious, and then after I left college, I I had I basically had an identity crisis.
I bet.
Um, there was mental health stuff going on. Um, I was like, I had like a really bright, optimistic future, and then I hit the job market and depression, and that not going very well. It it hit me extremely hard, and um, I it's kind of hard to explain, but like I guess that what happened, I'll just say it happened that my my brain kind of turned like the Christianese would probably be that I was dormant in the faith,
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
I basically turned it into something that I just did not want to talk about. I did not go to church. I just stopped engaging, um, and it, you know, probably going to have to do a lot of digging in therapy to figure out more specifics of, you know, why or how that could even happen. But, I just kind of trudged on with my life and, was trying to solve my problems. And, so just not even on the back burner. I was just, anytime it would pop up, I would just toss it out of my mind. Um, and I did that for 9 years. Um, and I do not recommend this path.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
um, I guess in retrospect, it had to happen. Um, but, it was just something I just did not want to face or deal with. But, in that intervening time, I mean, obviously there were different kinds of challenges that would pop up. I mean, um, you know, my, you know, I grew up in a loving household. My churches were very loving and caring. Um, some of my churches were um, very atypical. You would not think that, um, they would allow things that a lot of churches wouldn't
Yeah.
allow. They were more welcoming than a lot of churches
Yeah.
in some ways. Um,
I think that's also a very common misconception for people who didn't grow up religious, is because they listen to a lot of like podcasts and things that where people talk about religious trauma, they think that like religious households and churches were these horrible, terrible places to grow up, and everything was just like, you're a slave for God and yada, yada, yada. But I think actually what is the most harmful about things like devout Christianity is that everyone is so kind. Everyone is so nice. Everyone is right there when you need a hand, whether you're moving or you need your dog walked or you hurt yourself and you can't, maybe your leg is broken and they can help you around the house. That's what makes it so difficult to leave. And that's what makes it so difficult to step away because it's the idea of disappointing those nice kind people who have been nothing but good to you, and them saying, was the way I raised you not good enough? Like, is that what you're trying to say? Did I do something wrong? You think if you're not a Christian or you didn't grow up Christian, you think like, oh, of course you're scared to leave, like, because everybody's horrible. It's like, no, they're so nice that you feel like an a-hole by being like, this doesn't make sense. I don't get it. Like, this is harmful. It's making me feel bad about who I am, and it's making me claim to believe things that I genuinely don't believe. Um so as somebody who grew up religious, that doesn't surprise me at all that like you actually had a very loving household, because you talk about like that struggle, that internal struggle. That makes perfect sense to me why it would be so difficult to kind of leave those ideas behind.
Yeah, so um, yeah, so I was letting, obviously letting down a lot of the guards that I had had, like, that type of media I would watch and all that stuff. But, in the back of my mind, I'm still like on like I haven't changed teams, right? Like
Right.
you know, my family still feels right. My church still feels right. Like,
Right.
you know, um, but over time, like some of the things in those intervening years, like, you know, you s- you know, those intervening years started giving some really big challenges, like I don't know, Trumpism,
Yep.
and like, I was just like stunned. Uh, I mean, it's its whole thing, but like, I would even like the thing that got me starting talking back to people in my religious past was I was like, dudes, like we were taught, like I went on mission trips to uh, Central and South America. Like, what on earth are you doing with this guy that comes down an escalator and starts throwing out these horrifying accusations, ridiculous conspiracy theories about immigrants? Like, hello, we went
Right.
to their houses.
Right.
Those
Right.
people fed us while we talked to them about our faith.
Yeah. He's
Like,
literally calling them shithole countries. And you spent how much time there, in their home, eating their food? Yeah.
yeah, I went on 4 or 5 mission trips down there. It's like I I don't understand how we can treat these people like we will be praying for them, we'll be praying going down there, facing dangers on their behalf, um, bringing down medical doctors, bringing the good news, bringing the gospel. I played with these kids. I played soccer with them. I blew bubbles with them. I learned how to make the the giant bubble mix stuff so I could blow giant bubbles with them. I did puppetry for them. Like it doesn't like treating these people as an enemy, and make no mistake, like they try to like obfuscate, but like, when he came on the scene, there was no hiding it anymore. Like, things like that, I would, be posting on Facebook. I would, be talking to these people, like, appealing to their conservative values, their Christian faith, the, literally the things that our church had done for them. Like
Right.
it, it does not make sense. It just
No.
doesn't. And
Right.
so, like, seeing that moral fabric, like, just start to feel like totally shredded, that really gave me, the sense like, I don't know what's going on here, but I can't go back to that. Um, I wasn't even thinking in terms of God. I didn't feel like I had any disproof of God or anything like that. Um, but you know, those those kind of things like really made me um, just like wonder, like what, like how is politics so important? Like how is that so important that you know when I was growing up, your faith, the way you treat people, the way you represent Christ, those are important. Those
Right.
are what guide your life. Whatever
Right.
decisions you make, those are what guide you. Um, and seeing that happen and not seeing, I mean, some of my, some, uh, sometimes, some of my friends from the Christian days would, agree with me, but it wasn't like, I mean, when something is that clear, you feel like, you know, everyone's going to circle around. Like you've made a good point. You've proved it,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're not going to vote for this guy. We're going to fight against this guy. No, that did not happen. Uh,
Wow.
no, my friends just slowly just stopped responding. A lot of them don't talk to me at all anymore. Blocked
Wow.
me. Um, yeah,
Wow. That's so sad.
yeah. And, I never, so as things like that happens, I think that was like one of the things that started setting the stage of like, you know, really realizing that I couldn't go back, but still having absolutely no idea where I belonged. Still not wanting to think about it. And um, the I kind of had like a moment where uh, I was um, there's like two there's like two things in my mind that I think like really helped me to see the possibility of what it's like when you don't believe in these things, when you don't believe that God is controlling everything, when you don't believe that everything on earth, every person is going to either heaven or hell. And one of them was like such like a simple thing. It was like a few seconds that it totally changed my life. That I was just watching YouTube
Hmm.
and just uh, let's play series. These game commentators that they were just talking about something, whatever. I don't even know what. Um, and the guy happened to be Jewish, but not like religious Jewish, just like culturally Jewish, um, and he said something like, "Oh, well, we're not really going to talk about religion, um, or faith," and uh, but he said like, um, but I will say one thing: hell's not real. That shit's fucked up. That doesn't make any sense. And then he just like casually went on. He just said like, "Oh, well, Jews don't believe in hell. I never had that problem." And then he just went on with something totally different. And like my mind like hit the brakes.
I bet.
Like like obviously I was aware that there are people that didn't believe in hell, right? But like hearing someone just so casually, so confidently, no fear. This is not something that is in the back of their minds. However many times that someone has told them that they're going to hell, or they see so many people that this is a core of their belief, and
Yeah.
he's just like, just breeze by it, move on, but
Yeah.
confident enough to say, yeah, just the concept of hell is messed up. I
Yes.
don't believe it. I've never thought
Yes.
about it, never had that problem. And like
Yes.
that freedom, utter freedom, like I like it like stunned me.
It's such a privilege to have. It's such a privilege to not have to go through everything that so many people have to go through to ever reach that point if they ever get there. Yeah, and it's wild to hear the first couple of times. You're like whiplashed. You're like, "What the
Yeah, I
what?"
mean, because like culturally, we still have like these fears. Like people don't want to be like, they don't want to accidentally, say something wrong, and they don't want to go to hell, so they just, they don't, it's like superstition, really, like how
Yeah.
we talk about it in hushed tones or whatever. Um, But yeah, so like somehow that just the freedom that came through in that moment, which I hope I can impart to other people. Like people who are
Yeah.
listening, I know there's people who probably believe all sorts of different things. Hell's not real. It's not. I believed in it. It was very important to me. It's not.
I love
Um,
that. I
you know,
love that.
yeah. So go do something fun, do something naughty, and you'll be fine. I promise.
I love
I
that's
can't
like
prove it, but I'll just promise for myself. That's
I'm
that's
like
an offer.
honored to be here for that moment that you got to like impart that wisdom that you were given. Like, by the way, anybody listening, hell's not real. Say it with me. Hell's not real. Go do something fun. That's
Oh, yeah,
beautiful. That was
yeah, it feels so
beautiful.
good. It
I
does.
bet. I bet.
And you go ahead.
No, continue.
Yeah, I was gonna go on with the second part that it was another moment that um, I I've always struggled, something I mentioned in the email and um, uh, is I've I've realized or I've at the moment it's a self-diagnosis that I have ADHD.
Mhm.
And I didn't know that until a couple months ago. And so
Mhm.
this story precedes that. But,
Mhm.
it kind of makes it really obvious.
Yeah.
If you already know about ADHD, it's going to be like, oh, duh, ADHD. But,
Yeah, I was
um,
diagnosed at like 28. Yep.
oh, yeah. And, I feel your pain. um, but it was just a few years ago that I was like sitting around for the millionth time being like, why am I procrastinating this? Why am I struggling so much? Why? And um, and what's funny is I I started reading um, this article by I don't even know what he was, some kind of professor. Um, and it's funny because it wasn't even the first time I had read it. I had read it previously. This is how much I was procrastinating. That I was reading an article another time about procrastination instead of actually dealing with whatever I needed to procrastinate, whatever I was
Right.
procrastinating. And somehow it didn't hit the first time. But like the second time I read it, and it was a similar type of experience that um, this professor was talking about how he was a really bad procrastinator, but he found ways to make it fit for his life. That he would kind of sort of bend rules a little bit, but he would always um, but he would do things to work with his brain. He would work with his colleagues. He would figure out what he could procrastinate. He'd um, he had these techniques, and as I read it, I realized like his approach is so totally different than mine because fundamentally my relationship with my procrastination and my nature as a human being, like I fundamentally am striving against it, and I basically hate it. I hate this part of myself. It's something that I want to exercise
Interesting.
out of my life, and it's but reading again someone talking with so much freedom and sense of humor about a challenge that he's describing the same type of challenge as I am, but he's having fun with it and he's explaining how he can, finding ways he can help other people and have a good reputation despite being a procrastinator. And like again, that sense of someone having that freedom, it like clicked something with me that I
Yeah.
realized that I there was something in me that had to change or else I was going to hate myself forever. Like this was such a deep part of me, something going on with me that like I I either have to keep fighting this forever or I have to find a way to accept it. And
Mhm.
somehow that was the thing that clicked in my brain was like, I can't accept it because this whole battle that I've had with good and evil and believing in a sin nature, believing that there's a God with a perfect plan that I'm not matching, that's it. That's why I
Right.
can't. have a good relationship with my own behaviors, with my own
Right.
nature.
Right.
And it was like it was ah yeah, throat cave out at the good
You
part.
good? You caught
Um
that really quick. Like you muted yourself super fast. That was awesome.
yeah, I told you this isn't my first rodeo.
Yeah.
But yeah, my like somehow it was like a moment where like all of it crashed down and like my mind experienced what it was like to imagine like I'm just a person. This is just who I am. And I don't have to hate myself.
Yeah.
I was taught things, I believed things that made me feel like I had to. Like being a good person meant that I was constantly, that I had to fight this battle all the time to not fail, to not have a bad work ethic or whatever.
Right. Well, and what I love there is I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, but it was perfect. These parallels where you're like you said I have to confront this or this is going to be how I spend the rest of my life. I love that applies to religion, faith, God, and that applies to ADHD and whether or not you're going to address that. So it's like in both of these very important like life altering moments, you're figuring out like I either have to handle this situation that I am confronted with as soon as possible and admit that this is the case, whether it's that I'm not religious anymore or whether it's that I have ADHD and like that's impacting my life, or I have to just live the rest of my life like this. And is that some way that I want to live the rest of my life? And I just think that's like awesome. Like that juxtaposition of the two situations. And the interesting thing is like I feel like people would be so much more quick to address the ADHD part than the like eternal salvation part, which is always interesting to me. Like, okay, I have ADHD. I can deal with that. It's like, okay, potentially could be burning in hell, or I don't believe it in at all. I'm just going to ignore that part of my life for a while because that's a little complicated. And it's so interesting that people can the cognitive dissonance there, where people are much more likely to confront one which objectively is not the eternal one, and then like put away the one that like matters eternally.
Hmm.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I find that, um, Penn um, he says that he doesn't believe in God or hell, and he makes the comment slash joke that he doesn't believe that anybody does. And the reason that he says that is like, he says, if I really believe that hell existed, like, I would be the most perfect person ever. Because if you
Right.
really believe it,
Right.
then you would
Right.
not misbehave at all, ever. But in reality, like, a lot of this, for most people, I mean, I was like a very, you know, philosophical, theological, like, very much, you're telling me to believe this literally, so I'm going to figure out how to make that work. I'm going to keep working on it. But most people, that's not how they believe at all. It's we're going to church. This is what we do. This is how we act. Um, and it's a cultural thing. It's not like it really isn't a literal thing that affects every single decision of their life. Even if they will claim that, they go home and they do their stuff. They argue with people. They,
Right.
you know, like it's not, you know, so these concepts like hell and stuff like that. That's why you can kind of put them off to the side, right? Because you know people like we live in this world. We live in this real world. There's real dangers here. There's real things you got to accomplish, real things you have to avoid. This is what people are doing, right?
Yeah.
Christians are doing it, atheists are doing it, everyone's doing it. Like all the religious stuff, like you can like you can just put it off for a while, right? Um, so I think that's kind of, why it is this weird thing that it jumps from being super important to suddenly you can forget about it for a while and nothing happens to you, right? Um, it's a weird thing.
Yeah, but you're 100% right about that. Like, I feel like one of the ways that we can really gauge whether or not Christian belief is true 100% belief is, like you said, if you truly think that hell exists, you would be literally the most perfect person ever. Or you would like collapse in a heap of nerves and anxiety because you cannot possibly be the most perfect person ever. And it's like consuming you, right? Like you would either
Yeah.
be perfect or you would be just like having like a mental breakdown. But it makes you wonder how many people out there are going through the motions every single day, but don't actually believe any of it when it really comes down to it. And it's more of a fear of not believing it and a fear of it not being true than the fear of it being true, if that
Um,
makes sense.
oh yeah, I mean, that's to me that's like such a clear thing now for so many people is like the like changing any kind of belief is really hard, right? If you already think you know what's going on and something, you know, it helps you make decisions, you're trusting it, other people are going along with it. Anytime you change that, it's going to be hard, you know. Um, I mean, there's, you know, any kind of example, if it's politics, if it's your favorite team, is, when you're a kid and you're told, your brother tells you this is the best baseball team ever, and you're like, oh, okay. And so then you're like, this is the best baseball team ever. This is the best pitcher who's ever lived, and then you get a little bit older and then you start reading stats and you're like, wait,
Yeah, you're
that's
like,
not, wait,
hold on a
wait, what's
second.
going on here?
Yeah,
Like something's wrong.
right.
But then
That's a great way to put it.
you can't just jump, you can't just change your mind. That doesn't happen. You start building it up. You start putting the pieces together in a different way that makes sense. You start building the wall, whatever it takes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then with religion, it's that times a million, right?
Oh my gosh.
The
Yes.
And
Oh,
I think this is something that we don't talk about, but I think it's a property of your brain that, like, your brain can start making these, like, forming these conclusions before you're totally aware of those conclusions. Like, I
yeah.
feel like your brain can detect when you're about to cross an edge, and you might not realize exactly what's going on, but you'll start feeling afraid and danger, and you'll start changing, you know, if someone starts talking with you about your faith and, well, didn't your, what about this pastor who did this, or this church that did that, um and isn't this hypocritical, like, you know you're not just going to jump and be like, oh, okay, you're right. Like, that's not going to happen. You're going to recoil and be like, wait a minute. Your brain's going to be like, hey, if that's real, are you really going to heaven? If that's real, what about all of the people who taught you? Were they lying to you? Were they believing something wrong? Like, if they were tricked,
Yeah.
won't you be tricked? Like,
Yep.
these are things that a brain is not just going to be like, okay, I guess this is what Tuesday's like. No,
Right.
that's not what a brain does. It's not, because culturally we want to hold on to things. We want to support each other. We want to feel connected to each other. People who switch sides are automatically suspect,
Mhm.
regardless of how valid their circumstances are,
Yeah.
right? You know, um, you know, and especially with something like atheism, right? Atheism does not provide hope. Like, it is not a
No.
source, like, it does not give you a list of reasons to hope. It doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't
No,
exist,
that's so
right?
true. That's
Um,
so true.
and so that's why in, like in a lot of media or stories or, cautionary tales, it's like, oh my gosh, this person, they lost their faith, and like it's short for like, oh well, it's like shorthand for like, oh well, they lost hope, they lost, faith that things can be better, or that
Mhm.
they, that the bright future that awaits all of us is for them, right? you know So that, this type of thing, this type of belief, going from where there's lots of faith, lots of hope, to a belief where there is no faith that's given to you. There's no hope that's given to you. You have to generate it now.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
that's
But
that's a very hard step.
it is, and I say that to people all the time. I'm like, when people think of atheists, they think of people that are like dancing on Jesus's grave, being like, "F y'all, like we don't gotta believe in shit," do anything. But I'm like, do you know what a bummer it is to know that when you love someone who dies, you're never gonna see them again? Like,
Mm.
do you know what a bummer that is? And like, I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that there's a heaven somewhere where you can see the people that you love the most, like after they've passed away. I don't believe it. If we're talking about true belief, not, pressure, not peer pressure, not like really true belief, I simply have seen no evidence to suggest that this is the case. And I have seen more evidence to the antithesis than that is the case. Right. And so that's such a good I love what you said, like, some of the things you're bringing up, like, you put them so eloquently. It's like, we have to as atheists, we have to manufacture our own hope. And so when you see someone who is a very hopeful atheist, I wanna know what it is that they're on, I'm like, "What?" Like, "You're so like, what's going on?" Like, "What is it that's got you so?" And I think there is hope given to you and that you're not gonna burn forever. That's great. You're like, that's woof. Um, the hope that like people that you care about are not gonna burn in hell forever because they're gay or whatever. That's hopeful. It's a huge bummer that there's no heaven. Although the heaven of the Bible, I'm gonna be honest, sounds like a really boring place. Like it sounds really boring. Their idea of fun back then, not my idea of fun. Um, but yeah, like this idea that we're out here like manufacturing our own hope, because where most people find hope is in the Bible and in the afterlife, and most of the places they find joy are things that they're just being promised blindly, that nobody can prove they actually got. um that's very interesting, a very interesting observation. I never have heard it put that way, but that's so true. That's very, very true.
Yeah, I think so much now about like, what it is, you know, there's a huge difference between, and you know, and, especially going back to like origins and stuff, is like there's a huge difference between when you believe that, humans are put here for a reason, that there's a purpose, that there's a plan going on, a story going on, a role we're supposed to fill, you know, the world we live in is set up for a reason, for something to happen or whatever. Believing in that versus what I believe now, which is things evolved and eventually intelligence evolved and developed enough that suddenly you get fully sentient creatures that now are aware of existence being finite, the fact that we are creatures that care so much about things and we instill value in so many things, in each other, in our work, in the beauty we see around us, and we care so much about it, but we are also realizing that we are powerless against the things that will take them away,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they are finite, that
Right.
time moves in one direction and it takes everything eventually,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and realizing that that's what humans are. We are creatures that woke up and we care so much and we're so afraid of things at the same time. And we've never figured out how to reconcile it. Not really. We have not figured
Yeah.
out how to agree on it. We've not figured out how to get along with each other. We just haven't.
Right.
And that difference between those two things, you know, those two viewpoints is really stark. And, um, it's, it, but to me, like there is still a ton of hope in that story. Like, to me, hope has been passed down to me, right? Civilization started about 10,000 years ago. We've advanced in ridiculous ways. I was just talking to people. I feel like I'd bring it up all the time. It's like my thing. Like 100 years ago, we didn't have penicillin. We didn't have any way to fight bacteria. You realize that means everywhere was a death trap, right?
Yeah.
All of the people who lived before there, if you got a cut and you got infected, I mean, there's like, you know, there there are different kind of remedies and stuff.
Bye.
But really, bye. Like, I'm
Bye.
sorry, this is what happened to you. There's billions of these bacteria everywhere, and I'm sorry, you're gone. Like,
Yeah.
it was that scary. Cut
Yeah.
on a rock. Sorry. There's, we don't catch it in time. We don't, you know, they, I mean, and
We put
I mean,
leeches on it because that's supposed to fix it.
yeah,
Like,
and I mean, medical science, oh my gosh, like, it's astonishing, like, how much we knew and how hard we worked on things, and yet how just stunningly bad we were at medical science even then.
yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
there was remedies and stuff, but man, the world was a death trap, and
Yeah.
our doctors were not always all that helpful. Like,
Yeah.
you
Wasn't
know,
it just like I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure it was just the Civil War or around that time period where a doctor was like, "Hey, I've noticed when we operate on one person and then we dip our hands in water and then we operate on somebody else, that second person lives a lot more than when we don't dip our hands in water in between people. Should we start doing that? Like, should we start doing that more often?"
oh
They
yeah,
they weren't washing their hands like in
yeah,
between people and everybody was dying. And that
yeah.
wasn't
Washing your
that long
hands,
ago.
18 technology from the 1800s.
Yeah.
Um, you know, like, and just think about how, like, like we are facing lots of challenges right now. It's a really scary time, and humans have developed ways to create even more danger for ourselves. Great job.
Yes.
But
Yes.
like the very fact that we can do what we can, that we can save so many lives, that we can live so long, that now we aren't completely ignorant of the things that are killing us all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the unbelievable things we've been able to do. You know, gosh, vaccines. We are able to program and build up our own immune system to fight against things proactively. Like
Yeah.
the the things we've been able to harness, the ways we figured out how to work together, combine our knowledge, like the fact that all of this was handed to me. I did not make any of this.
Yeah.
I've done my tiny little part to contribute to it, but all of this was handed to me. And all of those people who worked, most of those people were working thanklessly. They were
Yes.
working against disinformation and pseudoscience just like
Yes.
we are now.
Yes.
Like,
And to that point, if we just figured out within the last 200 years that washing your hands is literally the difference between life and death, are you sure that you are gonna base your entire eternal salvation on a book that was written 2,000 years ago? Like, are you sure? I'm just I'm like, doctors knew what they were doing before we discovered washing their hands. They were considered professionals. Everybody listened to them. They did what they said. And then one day they're like, "Oh, hey, this huge discovery, right? Changes the globe. Are you sure that nothing in that book is out of date, kind of like those doctors? You're positive, right? Like, I'm almost 100% positive that God probably has rules on how to use Twitter, on what's improper to do with your cell phone, right? They didn't even have glasses back then. They didn't even know what glasses were. It's like, you're sure, and you are 100% sure that those people know exactly what happens to you after you die. I just have questions. I have questions, is all I'm saying.
yeah, I mean, if you take a Bible and you sent it back in time 1500 years, the timeline would not change, right? Because they had the Bible.
Hmm.
Take a pamphlet on vaccines, take a middle school science book, send it back in
Mhm.
time, utterly changes the course of history like that.
Or
you know
you get burned at the stake for heresy.
oh yeah, that's actually more likely.
They're just like, we
um
disagree with this. It makes us anxious. Burn him. Burn this man. Honestly,
uh
that's probably what happened to the first people who discovered washing your hands and penicillin and stuff. They got burned at the stake because nobody wanted to hear it.
yeah, if I remember right, the doctor um who first discovered that, the surgeon who first discovered that, did get a lot of pushback. um I think it's kind of a little bit more complicated than that, but um yeah, there was a lot. Like, it was not like, and like, he demonstrated it with evidence and stuff, but it wasn't like, oh wow, let's do this right away, right? No, it was, we've never done this before. We are doctors, we know what we're doing. How dare you say we are the ones contaminating? How could it possibly be us? We're the one helping. It's like,
Yep.
oh, the
Yep.
terms, man. I mean,
How dare you imply that research and discovery makes information we didn't have available now? Burn him. Burn him at the stake. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
And
and so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
I
off.
mean, I was just gonna make the point of, like, exactly what I was talking about before with um sorry, I think I'm gonna have to get some water.
Yeah, no
Be
problem.
right back.
Do what you gotta
I
do.
went I
Yep.
went through all. I was gonna try to get my cat in here too. She was meowing at the door. I don't know if it came through, but
No.
then she didn't want to come in.
I had
Rat.
my parrots in here during an earlier meeting. They'd been silent all day, which is very rare. And the minute I started speaking, they started squawking to the beat of what I was saying to this person. And I was like, and I'm just trying, and I was like, you've been quiet all day. What's going on? I had to kick them out.
Uh, oh, that's brave to have a podcast and parents.
Can't say
um,
the episode's going to turn out great, but we'll find out.
um, but yeah, I mean, I think I just wanted to put a button on it that, like, now, I mean, if it isn't evident already, like, you know, the fact that now I see the world this way, and I can see the world this way, that I can see the contributions of science and all of that. And then, like, thinking back to my past and how I was trained to reject science,
Hmm.
you know, and, you know, and something that, um, and, and unfortunately, trained really is the right word, because,
Yeah.
um, you know, it was very deep and very deliberate. So, like, um, a lot of these creationists, um, they're like, you kind of wonder, like how does it persist? Like what's the goal? Like how can you keep persisting with this creationist idea? Like, how does it work in the modern world, right? Like, how does it keep going? And, like, what's the motivation, and how can, because, if you're a creationist and you're talking to scientists and you're like saying, and like you're literally going to the school boards and saying, oh, well, this is not real science. Like, somebody's going to correct you, right? Somebody's going to come up and talk with you, and eventually, they'll listen to you, they'll talk to you, they'll be able to show evidence. Like, how can you keep going in the face of that? And what I had talked about before is, um, like, these challenges from parents. to their teachers. Um,
Yeah.
the thing is that they these were not independent things. These were not parents who just suddenly got the idea that evolution is terrible. Like they were specifically told that this is, something that is a challenge and that they should challenge. But not only that, these creationists in the media they produce, the books they write, they would tell students, kids, to challenge their teachers, to um, sorry, my voice goes out very quickly.
No, I'm just like
um,
I'm really impressed by your technology. It just like goes radio silent. That's
yeah,
awesome.
I'm quick on the mute. I've been teleworking for 3 years, so
Yeah, you're like I've been me for a while. I know how this works.
um, yeah, um, you know, they tell kids like, you know, the, you know, your school will teach you these things that are not true, and you, as a Christian, you should stand up for the truth. You
Isn't that
should,
wild?
and I was one of those kids. I
Like
believed it, and
I
I did
remember
it.
when that sounded normal, but like that is such a like messed up way to send kids out into the world. Is like, hey, you can't trust your teachers. And then they're like, well, you can trust them for some things, but like not everything. But by then you've already been told you can't trust your teachers. Like that's just wild. Like who do you trust when you can't even trust your teachers? That's just it's so messed
Yeah,
up.
it's you know, looking back, it's like even like saying that, like I was trained as a kid to tell my teachers that they were wrong about evolution, and I had backup too. I had a science teacher in high school, public high school, who was the mother of my youth pastor. So she knew where I stood. I knew where she stood, and um, she had an obligation to teach, the principles of evolution in that class. But there's no law against sarcastically teaching something, and there's no law against teeing up things to teeing up a student that you know is in your classroom to bring up a creationist talking point that you both know about. Like, this is absolutely stunning to me. This is science. This is the field
This is
where,
like children's brains, like
yeah,
and
this
minds
is
and like
this is the
knowledge.
future of our country. These are the
Yeah.
people that are supposed to be learning the building blocks that they will use for the rest of their lives. That whether they go on into like, dude,
The
if
building
you
blocks of
never
like
go into science,
how the world works just
yes,
in general, like the planet that we live on.
yes, this is like, yes, the literal facts of the the matter you're touching, the bodies that you have, the fact that you're going to go into the world and everyone is going to lie to you about food science and nutrition. Like people are
Yeah.
going to tell you that crystals have magic powers or whatever. There's going to be companies that are going to say, "Oh no, our pesticide is totally safe." And sometimes they're telling the truth and sometimes they're lying. Like
Yeah. Like
like
predatory ads.
we need people to think very clearly about this. We need people to have these tools because once they're out of school, good luck. Like when is your
Yeah.
chance to get them back and be like, "Hey, that thing that you're being lied to about, hey, we can help you." No,
Yeah.
that's gone. Your chance
Yeah.
is gone. And, you know, and so in that class I brought up some things. In other classes, I brought up challenges. Um, and because I believed that I was being taught the real science and that I should be sharing it and stopping the bad science. And
Yeah.
it turns out one of the things I've looked into, like, it's kind of a very weird specific thing to teach kids, right? And, it doesn't have anything to do with morality, right? Most Christians, they don't know anything about science. They don't care. They want their kids to behave and whatnot, tell the truth. Like, what does science have to do with any of this? So it turns out that the people who are teaching these things and promoting these things, the reason that they wanted parents and students to challenge their teachers is because they wanted lawsuits to come up. They wanted these things to be challenged in a court of law because guess what? You can't challenge science on the merits, but what you can do is tie up a school district so that they have to spend a bunch of money, waste it fighting lawsuits,
That's
or
ridiculous.
to be able to, they can generate a ton of science books that have their version of science, and they'll start distributing those, make those more easily available. And then the textbooks that have actual science in them, they they can have a lawsuit that says, if you teach evolution in this book, you have to put a label on it that says, oh, well, this teaches evolution, which is something that people find challenges their faith or whatever that. Like, that's a real thing that happens in this country. And it's, um, you know, I think, so it's very tricky because there's people who genuinely believe this stuff, like me, who fought for it, right? If I continued to believe it, I would have gone on to probably be someone like this. But, you know, like, this is like a conspiracy theory that was real, that I was a pawn in. And fundamentally, it seems to go back to the simple thing that there are forces in this country that don't believe in public education and want to undermine it at every turn. And, this is a way that you can take people who genuinely believe in something and weaponize them against the school system. And it's stunning. It's even more stunning how effective it has been.
Yeah.
The fact that people don't get quality of education about evolution is largely due to this. Um, there's lots of people that tacitly maybe understand evolution. In this country, that number is very low. The people who really understand it are very, very low.
Yeah.
Um, and it's 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 stunning because evolution was such a radical step forward for science that it's still hard to even encapsulate. Like, it wasn't just, hey, we figured out some things about fish and frogs and stuff. Like, it was cracking the code of how all of life works.
And it was proving the Bible wrong.
Mm.
Like, without that even being the goal, like, it proves them wrong, you know? Like, that's the wildest part is they didn't even set out to do that, for the most part. They just sat out for answers, and the answers do not line up with what the Bible says. And instead of people being like, "Oh my gosh, maybe this ancient text that was written by people who have never used Google Maps, is out of date and out of touch, and maybe they had a small worldview and didn't quite understand how the world worked." Instead, it's no, no, we need to stifle this amazing information and these amazing opportunities to understand human life and instead insist that the Bible is still correct.
Yeah, and it isn't just like, it wasn't like the first thing that proved like the Bible literally being incorrect. Like, there's already things, it's actually more of a modern resurgence, reactionary thing of people who believe that the Bible is literal, every single word.
Yeah, like
That wasn't,
fundamentalism is like coming back, which is weird.
but you know, it really does go back to what I talked about before. Like before evolution, there was no way to understand our place in the world, how the world worked, what we were observing.
Where we come from.
Like there wasn't a way to trace it back and understand it. So, you know, what I was talking about before with the general idea of like we were put here for a reason, you know, God put us here, we are following a story. Like there wasn't any way to, there was no alternate explanation that made sense, right? Being
Right?
placed here and created by God in some way, you know, for West, you know, and this is very Western, um, you know, but um, you know, some kind of creation of some kind. Um, like there was no non-religious, non-spiritual explanation. There wasn't something that fit the facts.
Right?
But once you have evolution, once you have all of those pieces of being able to trace back and know, um, particularly where humans come from, right? Because you know, lots of people that they don't know or care anything about animals. They, you know, but once you start with people, you know, how did we get here? Because I'm a person. I care about me. Why am I here?
Right.
How did
And you
I
also
get
care
here?
about like critical thought and like ideas and figuring things out as opposed to just blindly believing what you're told because that's easiest.
Right, right. And, you know, evolution, it gave an explanation that fit and it made perfect sense.
Yeah.
And, you know, it faced backlash in some ways, but like the scientific community, it only took 10 to 20 years for the debate to be over. Like the debate
Wild.
we're having now is not because there's still scientists who doubt. That's not the case at all.
Right.
It's because there's been a pushback and because of court cases and because of the popular acceptance, the you know, the people in the general populace that they don't want to accept it. The scientists of the day, no matter how hard they fought against it, they the debate ended because
Yeah.
there was it was the answer.
Right.
It solved everything. Before we knew about DNA, before we had fully understood things like heredity, some of the key components, it it was the answer.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
it
just
cracked the code.
I can't imagine going to a mechanic and it's the mechanic's job to fix my car. And he's like, "You need to replace your engine." And I'm like, "No, I don't." And he's like, "No, I'm telling you, like, you don't even have to do it here. I'm not trying to get money out of you. I'm just telling you, you need to replace your engine." And I'm like, "No, I don't believe that." And he's just like, "I don't think it's a thing of belief. I think you're gonna crash this car and die if you don't replace this engine." I'm like, "Nah." I can't imagine doing that. Or like, going to like a professional of any kind and just being like, "I don't believe that you are correct, and I don't even believe it exists, like what you're telling me." It's just unfathomable. And yet
Yeah,
we've developed this society where it's perfectly okay to be like, "The science says this is true," and to be like, "No, that's actually a political opinion and it's not mine. So do with that what you will." Like, I remember Greta Thunberg was talking, this was a couple years ago, and somebody was talking about like COVID and stuff, and she was like, "How are they handling COVID in your country?" And she said like, "Well, in my country, science isn't a political opinion, so everybody kind of agrees on scientific stuff." She's like, "That's just you don't exist to just not believe science. You believe science regardless of what side you're on." And I just thought that was mind blowing because in our country, it's always been like one side believes science, the other side doesn't, or at least the last few years it has been. And it's just I am always shocked to find out that there are parts of the world where that is not a thing. And even people on opposite sides of the spectrum are like, "Why wouldn't I believe science? Like, why wouldn't I believe the scientists? Why are they the bad guys?" It's just astronomical to me.
yeah. It's. I mean, it's it's funny when you are brought up as a Christian, you're taught things like, oh, well, the atheist world and the scientific atheists, and like you're you're kind of given this impression that there's this cabal and huge mass of atheists that
Yeah.
are running things and
Yeah.
don't want, they're like fighting against the word of God or whatever. And then
Yeah.
you find out, like in your own country, it's like, well, wait. Less than half of the country even believes in evolution. And that means that we outnumber not just atheists, forget that, like the
Yeah.
people who even believe in evolution, like it's it's really, that's like a super weird quirk about the United States is so much scientific advancement has come from here, and yet we are absolutely
Yeah.
struggling to have a populace that even accepts it.
Yeah.
That
And
there's,
oh, sorry, continue. I didn't mean to cut
yeah,
you off.
just saying, like, there is this huge general sense of anti intellectualism,
Yep.
believing that there's some kind of scientific elite conspiracy going on. And that's one thing I wanted to say real quick is like creationism, um, it's and really anti evolutionism. Like sometimes it's called a pseudoscience, and it, especially the way I was taught it, it was very dressed up as science, but in reality it is a conspiracy theory.
It is.
That's
It's
the
not
only
like
way to understand it.
it shouldn't even get to be called a pseudoscience because it's not. Like it's
No, because it fundamentally has to start, because if you start pushing back on the people who really don't believe it, then once they run out of their dressed up science beliefs, they will say things like, "Oh, well, that's what the scientific community wants you to say, or that's what scientists say about this," or they don't want to believe in God, and so they came up with the idea of evolution to disprove
right.
God. Like, it is a conspiracy theory that these scientists are working together to hide the truth.
Yes.
And when you put it that way, it's just like every other conspiracy theory.
Right. And also, we hear so much about the war on Christianity, the war on Christianity, the
Oh,
liberals and the left and the war on Christianity. But I will tell you, as someone who has lived in many states, north and south in this country, I have never seen an atheist picket sign in my whole life. I've never seen an atheist out there standing on the curb telling me I'm not going to hell. Like that's just doesn't exist. And then I've also never seen a law passed in the name of atheism ever in my whole life. Can't name one. I've never had that impact my life. I might have heard, and I can't even think of them off the top of my head, but I might have heard of like bills proposed by like non-religious groups. They never make it. They never pass. You never hear about them except in the like fear-mongering headlines where they're like the war on Christianity is back. The people down with the devil worshippers are trying to get a devil statue at the Capitol or some shit like that. But it's just interesting to me that I am currently living in a country whose laws are about beliefs in Christianity and God, and literally right down the street on the nearest intersection, there's a guy who stands every day with a big old poster about repent or else. It's always got some message on it about like repent or like your eternal salvation is damnation. It's wild. And yet the war is so against, like, we're just here trying to tear down Christianity.
oh yeah, the whole war on Christianity, the concept of Christian persecution in this country, it's it really is another conspiracy theory that is really, it's stunning
Right.
that it comes out of anybody's mouth. Like I was
And
already being taught like things about, Christians being persecuted when I was sitting in a giant brick Baptist church with a huge steeple with a light in it.
that
Like
doesn't have to pay state or federal
it doesn't have
taxes.
to pay taxes.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Like
And
it
what does it say about Christianity or if somebody is a Christian, if they hear rhetoric about, debt relief, college debt relief, about housing the homeless, about feeding everyone for free at schools, about letting everybody celebrate whatever they want to celebrate whenever, letting people marry whoever they want to marry, love is love. If you hear those rhetorical comments, and you immediately think, "Oh, so we can't be Christians anymore." It's like,
Yeah,
we're just talking about being a good person. We didn't say anything about, but if you heard that and you thought that was anti-Christian, that's interesting.
yeah. I mean, that's another one of those things that like
You're telling on yourself.
these you know, I mean, it has to be political or at least just like socio-political, whatever. That um, the concept of secularism, the concept of, hey, we all live in the same place and we put taxes in the same place and then we get those services. Like things have to be fair. Like somehow that concept is just
Yeah.
twisted all to hell, that it's a conspiracy specifically against, Christian believers.
Right,
And
right. And
so
you're like,
that's how, people will think, oh, well, they're taking God out of this. And it's like, well, okay, that's like if you're paranoid, that, yes, if you are paranoid that someone is coming out to get you, then yes, you could twist it to mean that. Or maybe people have a freedom of religion, and the only way to do that is to not have your leaders act like your pastor. Like,
yeah,
um,
yeah, not have your pastor and your politician be the same guy. Like, that's yeah, I just realized I've held you a half hour longer. I was just like, I've just been interested in this conversation. I wanna be respectful of your time. Um, if you excuse me. Now I've got it, whatever it was.
oh
Um,
no.
if you, had a message for anyone who maybe is going through something similar to you, maybe they grew up religious, maybe they were that, zealot child who was like, "I'm here to prove, my teacher's wrong, and I'm here to make sure everybody hears about God," and now they're questioning things. Maybe they are an atheist, but they don't know what to do next. Maybe they think they're an atheist, they're not sure. What would you say? What advice would you give to somebody like that?
Yeah, so one concept is like, you know, um, as much as I want to be like, yeah, like become an atheist, it's the
Yeah.
answer.
Hell's not
Um,
real.
and
Say it again.
I could make my case for that. But like something that I realized is really important is like, I mean, it was a bad idea for me to just totally pitch the questions and just not deal with them at all. Uh,
Yes.
but but really what that taught me, that bad approach taught me too, is like you are a human being. You are a whatever you believe about where you came from or whatever, like you are a sentient thing. You have been taught certain things. By now you've probably figured out there's true stuff, there's lies, but like you are not obligated to pick a team.
Oh, interesting.
Like you can just be
Interesting.
you for a
Yeah.
while. Maybe you never pick a team. Maybe you like are like take your time to figure it out. Like these are the biggest questions that there are, right? And it feels
Interesting.
so scary to not have a team.
Yeah. Yeah, to not
That
belong to anyone, like any group.
that's the hardest feeling, is to feel like you are alone. But
Yeah.
here's the thing, like especially what I believe now, like whether I have a team or not, m- like you're listening to two people that have made like really big changes. And I am what I am now, and you meet people that they will be firmly what they are, and then later on they'll be something different. Like you are probably going to change, and it's fine to not pick a team right away. It's scary to not have a team. you know, but like you're fine. Just because someone has a team doesn't mean they're right. Just
That
because someone has a
that's
team doesn't
I
mean
love this.
it doesn't
This is
mean that like you need a team to be right or that you need a team to feel secure. Like just people who have a team, they will still feel not secure, right?
yeah.
But to me, like if you believe in yourself enough to be like, the I'm going to keep looking until the answers really make sense to me. And like that's totally fine. I
Yeah.
love people who are seekers and who are honest about it. You know, most people you meet, if you start asking these questions, they will revert to the things they've been taught. They will revert to the defenses they've been given. And, if you start challenging me on atheism, I'll probably start pulling in other people's words if the questions start getting hard. But, realistically, you are fine. Like, it may be really hard to find people to talk to that understands, but like, you can do it. Like,
That's
it's fine. You can be
I
you.
love that.
Take your time, do it right.
This is like episode 80 or something like that. And I think you're the only person to ever be like, you don't got to pick one. Like, you don't got to pick one. Most people are like, figure out which one like suits you best or, something like that. I love that. I think that's fantastic. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
I
That's
mean,
what a great message.
and another way to see it is like, if you're a person who will sit down and talk with me and, be honest, like I feel like we're already on the same team, right?
Yeah.
Because that's who I am. You know, I can, I might point out things that I think you're wrong. You'll point out things that I think you're wrong. But the fact that we can, like, people who sit down and can talk with each other and be honest and be charitable and be talking with a real intent to both learn and to teach, like that's my team. That's the
Yeah.
team I want to be on.
I love that. That's my team. I love that. That needs to be a shirt. Like, that's my team. That's great. Well,
Yeah. I
Derek,
want
this
a
has been
t-shirt that says,
awesome.
I'm a rational person with opinions. My ears work like you can talk to me, or something more pithy than that.
Something
Um,
like some really targeted t-shirt that's like very specific. It's
Yeah,
like,
because that's like the horrible thing is we feel like we can't talk to each other. We feel like we
yes.
have to pick a team. Like
Yeah.
and when things get really hard, and there are forces pushing in certain directions, we feel like we have to take up a battle. But,
Yeah.
you know, I was on the wrong team. I was on, you know, I was on the bad side. I was being groomed essentially
Literally.
to
Yeah.
be a to be someone to fight a battle for other people that was wrong, that
Yep.
was immoral, unethical,
Yep.
and just flat out wrong, anti-facts, etc. Like
Yep.
if someone like me can change, and I wish that more people had the patience to sit down and talk with me, that more people did challenge me. I wish they did sooner, kindly. um, I've lost touch with a lot of the people who did way back in the day challenge me, and yet they were essential. Um, you
Very
know,
much so.
if someone like me can be so wrong and now feels so free to accept people and so, not afraid of hell and not afraid to have my beliefs challenged, um, I have a lot of faith that wherever you are now, you can you can if you need to change, you will find a way to change,
Yes.
and that's fine.
And it's okay to be wrong. People
Yes.
being afraid of admitting they're wrong is half the issues with this country. That's half
Mm.
the problems. Like, probably more than half. It's probably like 75% is people just not wanting to admit when they know that they're wrong or they don't want to backpedal on something they said. So, I think it's great. Derek, I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah, that's my
awesome.
team, the people who can admit they're wrong.
Yeah, and that they've changed. I'm right there with you. The reason I've changed is because people had the time and patience to sit down and talk to me when I needed that the most. And they had the time and the patience to show me that I was wrong, but to love me anyway and to give me an opportunity to grow as that person instead of being like, ha ha, told you, you're wrong. They were like, It's okay, buddy. Like, we know it hurts. Come on over. Like, come join the team. It's all right. We're all wrong at one point. Um, but thank you so much for your time. I know I kept you so much longer than I said I would. I was just having such a good time listening to your opinions and your thoughts, and you had some Hail Marys in there, man. I was like, yes. I was like, yeah, you phrased it. I didn't know how to say it until you said it. Um, but yeah, thank you for your time and your wisdom and your story. And I wish you all the best of luck as you continue to grow and change and develop into whoever it is that you'll be one day.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sydney. And it didn't even really come up that like you know, I'm not, I'm still partly mostly closeted as an atheist. Like
Mhm.
I'm still figuring out how to make that
Yeah.
actually work for my life.
Yeah.
It's worked great for my brain, but I'm so grateful that you're willing to talk with me. To someone who doesn't have, I'm not pulling in followers or anything like to your podcast. Like I really appreciate that. You are, you know, talking to people and getting stories and um, yeah, so it was a real joy. And something like this is something that I wanted to do is be able to practice starting to be able to figure out how to tell my story and
Yeah.
how to get it out there, because like a lot of listeners gonna have a lot of hurdles,
Yeah.
and I'm just one of those people. So